Alright, so I was asked for some input on how to build an Eldrazi colorless commander deck. I've had a few iterations of my deck. Final one I've settled on is a colorless one. It's not the most efficient route, but if you're wanting to go colorless, I'll start by going over the possible commanders, at least the ones I use. We have Kozilek, the Great Distortion, Ulamog, the Infinite, Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, and Kozilek, the Butcher. Here is the actual card. This is just an art proxy I use. All four of these are in my current Eldrazi deck. Great Distortion is going to be good for card draw. I personally don't always use Great Distortion as the commander just because I think a lot of thought needs to go into the mana cost of your deck. I personally usually run the Butcher of Truth because you get 4 cards when you draw, when you cast. It has the Annihilator 4, as well as if Kozilek is put into a graveyard, your graveyard will be shuffled into your library. I also like Ulamog, the Infinite Gyre, as the other option. When you cast him, you get to destroy permanent. He's indestructible, so he's hard to get rid of. He's got the Annihilator 4 and the shuffle effect. I don't run any of the Emrakul's. Go into the mana base a little bit. These aren't all the cards that I use. I think these are just some important ideas and concepts to include in your colorless Eldrazi deck. So first off, we'll start with good mana rock to consider. I think depending on your playstyle, on your group, if you think a game might go for long enough for Replicating Ring to go off, you may as well include it. And some of my strategy does allow for Replicating Ring to be a bit more viable, but we'll get into that later. Kozilek's Channeler, War Room, just because this is good for colorless commanders. You can pay 3 tap to draw a card. You might want to have some consistent reoccurring card draw. Miko Koro, Center of the Sea. The only problem is it does allow everyone to draw a card. So it just kind of depends how desperate for card draw you get. And then another great part of your mana base you want to include is the Eldrazi Temple. You can either add colorless or add 2 colorless in order to cast colorless Eldrazi spells or activate abilities of colorless Eldrazi. And then the next 3 cards I think you should consider for your deck are Urza's Tower, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Mine. So if you have all 3 of them, rather than tapping for 1 colorless, it will tap for 2 instead. So if you have all 3, that's 6 mana out of 3 lands. That's half your commander right there. The next category of cards I like to include are going to be cost reduction cards. So Conduit Ruin is an okay card. When you cast Conduit Ruin, you will get a creature card with CMC 7 or greater into your hand, or no, on top of your library, which can be useful because at least if you have some of the other Eldrazi Titans in your deck, it gets you access to them. More importantly, the first creature spell you cast each turn is reduced by 2 colorless. Next, we'll move on to the Herald's Horn. You get to choose a creature type, and this reduces it by 1. Another useful card is Cloud Key. I think this is useful for choosing either artifact or creature. It kind of works in both scenarios because it'll reduce that chosen type by 1 colorless. Another great artifact to include would be the Forsaken Monument. Not only does it buff your colorless creatures, but it makes it so that if you ever tap a permanent for colorless, you get 2 colorless instead. And I think one of the more crucial lands for this deck is going to be the Eye of Ugin, because it reduces all colorless Eldrazi spells by 2. Alright, so the next category of cards, card draw. Some of them are reoccurring card draw. Other of them are one-offs, but this is just kind of a few of the cards I use. So Blinkmith Urn. At the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, if Blinkmith Urn is untapped, that player adds colorless to his or her mana pool for each artifact he or she controls. Obviously, that's just insane ramp for a colorless, very mana rock filled deck. And then I've also decided to include the Immortal Sun. What we want out of it is at the beginning of your draw step, you draw an additional card, as well as spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and creatures you control get +1/+1. And then on the lower cost card draw, I included Brainstone. Next category is a bit more on the control end of the spectrum. We'll start with this. So first card that I think is very valuable in this category is Winter Orb. It does also affect you, but this category has cards that will help mitigate that effect. Clock of Omens. So by tapping 2 untapped artifacts, you can untap a target artifact. So that would allow you to tap like Winter Orb and another artifact in order to untap, let's say, one of your mana rocks or something. And then the Icy Manipulator. This allows you to pay 1 and tap it in order to tap a target artifact, creature, or land. Because we already have some artifact tapping ability, it's good to go ahead and include Howling Mine. Allows each player to draw an additional card during their draw phase as long as it remains untapped. The card description does not mention this, but it is a Oracle text. Right, so the next category I use is that kind of helps get your artifacts on the board. So I use Foundry Inspector, which makes your artifacts cheaper. And then along with that, I like to use Inspiring Statuary. This gives all of your non-artifact spells improvise, and this can be used to further tap Winter Orb and Howling Mine. Another category I include is a Titan protection, I guess we'll call it. I'll include Lightning Greaves, which gives them haste and shroud. Another one I like to include is Chariot of Victory. 3 cost, 1 equip. Gives them first strike, trample, and haste. Right. And then Haunted Cloak. I include this. I almost prefer Haunted Cloak over Chariot of Victory, because for the same cost and equip, you get Vigilance, Trample, and Haste rather than First Strike, Trample, and Haste. So those are the core concepts I use for my colorless Eldrazi deck, but the most efficient deck is going to be a 5-color deck with Ezreika